Broken bond silence. Virginia Ginny Callahan had resigned herself to a marriage she didn't want, but just before she could say her vows, Rhett Mercer stormed into the church, his gun drawn. He caught her hand, his grip unrelenting. "You were never meant for him, Ginny," he murmured. "And now you never will be." Chapter 1. The Unwanted Altar. The scent of wilting lilies hung heavy in the air, a cloying sweetness that did nothing to mask the bitter taste of resignation in Virginia Ginny Callahan's mouth. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of the Harmony Creek Church, painting the worn wooden pews in hues of ruby and gold, a mockery of the joy this day was supposed to represent. She smoothed a hand over the ivory satin of her gown, the fabric feeling strangely foreign, constricting. It was a beautiful dress, expensive, ordered from a catalog all the way from St. Louis, but it felt like a costume, a shroud for the life she was leaving behind. Her reflection stared back at her from the small, cracked mirror in the vestry, a stranger framed by the elaborate lace veil. Eyes, the color of a stormy sky after a long drought, held a depth of sadness that no amount of expertly applied rouge could disguise. Her auburn hair, usually a riotous cascade of curls, was tamed, pinned into an elegant, albeit uncomfortable, chignon. At 57, Ginny knew she still carried herself with a certain grace, a strength honed by years of managing the Callahan ranch after her husband, Thomas, had passed. But today, that strength felt brittle, ready to shatter under the weight of obligation. She closed her eyes, the image of Thomas's weathered face flickering behind her lids. He'd been a good man, a hard worker, and he'd loved her in his own quiet way. Their marriage had been one of companionship, of shared burdens and quiet evenings on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mesas. It hadn't been a passionate love, not the kind that consumed you, but it had been enough. Until the drought came, relentless and unforgiving, turning their once thriving ranch into a dust bowl. Until the bank loans piled up, threatening to swallow everything they'd worked for. That's where Samuel Blackwood came in. A wealthy landowner, with eyes as cold and calculating as the coins he counted, he'd offered a solution, marriage to Ginny in exchange for settling the Callahan debt. A business transaction, pure and simple. Ginny had argued, pleaded, even considered running, but the thought of her younger brother, Daniel, losing the only home he'd ever known that was the anchor that held her fast. Daniel, with his easy smile and unwavering loyalty, was all the family she had left. She would sacrifice anything for him, even her own happiness. A sharp rap on the door startled her. "Ginny, it's time." Daniel's voice, usually so light-hearted, was laced with a forced cheerfulness that made her heart ache. She took a deep breath, the scent of lilies now suffocating. "Coming, Daniel." The church was packed. Every rancher, every shopkeeper, every family from miles around had come to witness the union of the widowed Virginia Callahan and the influential Samuel Blackwood. As she walked down the aisle, her arm linked with Daniel's, she felt their eyes on her, a mixture of pity and curiosity. She kept her gaze fixed on the altar, on the stern-faced preacher and the man who was about to become her husband. Samuel Blackwood was a formidable figure, tall and imposing, with a neatly trimmed gray beard and a sharp, hawk-like nose. His suit was impeccable, expensive, and his demeanor radiated power and control. He offered her a curt nod, a gesture devoid of warmth or affection. This was a business deal, and he treated it as such. The preacher began the ceremony, his voice booming through the hushed church. Ginny felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching the scene unfold from a distance. The words washed over her, meaningless and hollow. To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer. She felt Daniel's hand squeeze hers, a silent reassurance. She offered him a weak smile, a lie to comfort him. A tear traced a path down her cheek, smudging her carefully applied makeup. She brushed it away angrily. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give Samuel Blackwood the satisfaction. In sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part. The preacher paused, waiting for her response. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Ginny opened her mouth, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't do it. She couldn't utter those vows, not to this man, not under these circumstances. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the church burst open with a resounding crash. A figure stood silhouetted against the blinding sunlight, a whirlwind of dust and fury. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a worn leather duster billowing around him. A low-crowned hat shadowed his face, but Ginny recognized him instantly. The way he moved, the set of his jaw, the glint of steel in his hand, Rhett Mercer. A gasp rippled through the church. Whispers, hushed and frantic, filled the air. Rhett Mercer was an outlaw, a legend whispered in saloons and around campfires. A man with a reputation as dark and dangerous as the desert nights. A man she hadn't seen in over 30 years. A man she had once loved. He strode down the aisle, his boots echoing on the wooden floor, his gun drawn and pointed, not at Samuel, but at the stunned congregation, a silent warning to anyone who dared interfere. His eyes, when he finally met hers, were the same intense blue she remembered, but now they were hardened, etched with the harsh realities of a life lived on the edge. He reached her in a few long strides, his gaze never leaving hers. He caught her hand, his grip surprisingly gentle, yet firm and unrelenting. The calluses on his palm, a testament to a life of hard riding and harder choices, sent a shiver through her. "You were never meant for him, Ginny," he murmured, his voice a low, resonant drawl that sent a familiar warmth spreading through her chilled veins. "And now you never will be." The church erupted in chaos. Samuel Blackwood roared in outrage. The preacher sputtered in disbelief, and Daniel stared, mouth agape, caught between shock and a flicker of something that might have been hope. But Ginny couldn't look away from Rhett, from the raw intensity in his eyes, the promise and the danger that swirled within them. She was being stolen, abducted in broad daylight, in front of everyone she knew. And yet, a part of her, a long dormant part, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in decades, a terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. The scent of lilies was suddenly overpowered by the sharp, clean scent of dust, leather, and gunpowder, and something else, something indefinable, something that whispered of a past she thought she'd buried long ago. What was she to him? Now, after all of these years, and all of his past. Chapter 2. A storm of gunfire and promises. The world seemed to shrink, the uproar in the church fading into a dull roar as Ginny stared into Rhett Mercer's eyes. Those eyes, once filled with youthful laughter and reckless abandon, now held a depth of experience, a weariness that mirrored her own, yet burned with a fierce, unwavering intensity. Time, it seemed, had etched its passage on both of them, leaving its mark in the lines around his eyes and the silver threading through his dark hair, visible beneath the brim of his hat. But the core of him, the raw, untamed spirit she remembered, remained. Rhett. His name escaped her lips, a breath, a question, a plea all rolled into one. She hadn't spoken it aloud in decades, hadn't allowed herself to even think it, yet it felt strangely familiar, like a forgotten melody suddenly remembered. His grip on her hand tightened, a silent reassurance. "No time for questions, Ginny. We need to go." Samuel Blackwood finally found his voice, a bellow of rage that shook the rafters. "Mercer, you dare interrupt my wedding? I'll see you hang for this." Rhett didn't even glance at him. His focus remained solely on Ginny, his blue eyes searching hers, reading the confusion, the fear, and perhaps a flicker of something else he'd been hoping to find. "Are you coming with me, Ginny? I won't force you, but I won't leave you here." The choice. It was a dizzying, terrifying, exhilarating choice. Stay and be bound to a man she didn't love, a life of gilded misery. Go and step into the unknown with a man who was a legend, an outlaw, a ghost from her past, a man who had once held her heart in his hands. She looked at Daniel, his face pale but resolute. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. He always had. That small gesture was all the permission she needed. Yes, she breathed, the word a whisper, yet firm with a newfound conviction. I'm coming with you. Rhett's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile, a flash of the charming rogue she remembered. He holstered his gun, but kept his hand firmly clasped in hers. Hold on tight. He turned and, with Ginny in tow, started back down the aisle, towards the shattered church doors and the blinding sunlight beyond. The crowd parted before them, a sea of shocked faces, frozen in disbelief. No one dared to stop them. Rhett Mercer's reputation, the sheer audacity of his actions, held them paralyzed. But Samuel Blackwood wasn't about to let his prize escape so easily. He lunged forward, grabbing for Ginny's arm. You're my wife. You belong to me. Rhett whirled around, faster than Ginny thought possible. He didn't draw his gun again, but his eyes, now cold and hard as flint, were more menacing than any weapon. She belongs to no one but herself, Blackwood. And she's chosen to leave. Blackwood's face contorted with fury. This isn't over, Mercer. I'll hunt you both down. You'll pay for this. I'm counting on it, Rhett said, his voice low and dangerous. He turned back to Ginny, his expression softening slightly. Let's go. They burst out of the church and into the chaos of the street. Horses, spooked by the commotion, reared and whinnied. People scattered, shouting and pointing. Rhett led Ginny to a magnificent black stallion, its coat gleaming in the sun, its eyes wild and restless. He swung into the saddle with practiced ease, then reached down to help her up. The voluminous wedding dress made mounting the horse nearly impossible. Ginny struggled, hampered by the layers of satin and lace. Rhett, with a muttered curse, leaned down and, with one swift movement, ripped the skirt of the dress, tearing it to the knee. Ginny gasped, but the practicality of his action was undeniable. With the dress ripped, she was able to scramble onto the horse, settling in front of Rhett, his arms encircling her, holding her close. The warmth of his body, the scent of leather and horses and something uniquely him, was strangely comforting, even in the midst of the chaos. He spurred the stallion into a gallop, and they thundered down the main street of Harmony Creek, leaving behind the stunned silence of her almost wedding, the furious shouts of Samuel Blackwood, and the life she had known. The wind whipped through her hair, tearing at her veil, ripping it free. She watched it fly away, a white banner of surrender to the past. As they rode, shots rang out behind them. Blackwood's men, finally recovering from their shock, were firing at them. Ginny flinched, pressing closer to Rhett. He leaned down, his voice close to her ear. Don't worry, Ginny. They can't catch us. His confidence, the sheer audacity of his actions, was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had traded a life of certainty, of gilded misery, for a life of absolute uncertainty, of danger and freedom, with a man who was a stranger and yet, somehow, the most familiar person in the world. The vast, unforgiving desert stretched before them, a landscape as wild and untamed as the man who held her in his arms. She had no idea where they were going, what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, Ginny Callahan felt a flicker of hope, a spark of life that she thought had been extinguished long ago. The dust swirled around them, a cloud of uncertainty, but within that cloud, she felt a strange sense of peace, a sense of coming home. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. The only question that remained was the 30 years that lay between them and the echo of her unspoken feelings for him. Chapter 3. Flight Across the Barren Lands. The relentless sun beat down upon them, turning the already arid landscape into a shimmering furnace. Ginny's throat was parched, her lips cracked, and the fine dust that kicked up from the stallion's hooves coated her skin, mingling with the remnants of her torn wedding dress. The elegant satin, once pristine white, was now streaked with dirt and grime, a stark symbol of her shattered former life. Rhett rode with a practiced ease, his body moving in perfect rhythm with the horse, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. He was a creature of this harsh land, as comfortable in the saddle as he was on his own 2 feet. Ginny, on the other hand, felt every jolt, every bump, every muscle screaming in protest. She hadn't ridden like this in years. Not since she was a girl, racing across the open fields with a carefree abandon she could barely remember. They rode in silence for hours, the only sounds the rhythmic pounding of the horses' hooves, the whistle of the wind, and the occasional cry of a hawk circling high above. Ginny wanted to ask him 1,000 questions. Why now? Why after all these years? Where were they going? What was his plan? But the words caught in her throat, trapped by a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and a strange, unexpected shyness. She studied him surreptitiously, taking in the details she hadn't been able to absorb in the chaotic moments of their escape. The years had been kind to him, in a rugged sort of way. His face was leaner, harder, etched with lines of experience, but his jaw was still firm, his nose straight, and his eyes, those eyes still held the same magnetic intensity that had captivated her as a young girl. There were new scars, she noticed, a thin white line across his cheek, another on the back of his hand, each one a silent testament to a life lived on the edge. He felt her gaze and turned his head slightly, his blue eyes meeting hers. A faint smile played on his lips. "Tired?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that sent a shiver down her spine, despite the heat. "A little," she admitted, surprised by the honesty of her own voice. He slowed the stallion to a walk, giving the animal, and Ginny, a much-needed respite. "We'll stop soon," he said. "There's a hidden spring a few miles ahead. We can rest there, water the horse." They continued at a slower pace, the silence stretching between them again. But this time, it felt less strained, less heavy with unspoken questions. Ginny found herself studying the landscape, the rugged beauty of the desert that she had once taken for granted. The towering mesas, sculpted by wind and time, the resilient cacti, clinging to life in the harsh environment, the vast expanse of sky, stretching endlessly above them. It was a harsh land, unforgiving, but it also possessed a raw, untamed beauty that stirred something deep within her. As they rode, Rhett began to talk, not about his past, not about his reasons for rescuing her, but about the land. He pointed out the different types of cacti, the tracks of animals in the sand, the subtle shifts in the terrain that indicated the presence of water. He spoke with a knowledge and a respect that surprised her. She had always known him as a reckless, impulsive youth, a troublemaker, an outlaw. She hadn't realized he possessed such a deep connection to the land. "You know this place well," she observed, her voice raspy from thirst. He nodded. "Spent a lot of time out here. It's a good place to disappear. A good place to disappear." The words hung in the air, a reminder of his life, of the reasons he was an outlaw. She wondered what he had done, what had driven him to this life, but she didn't dare ask. Not yet. Finally, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they reached the spring. It was hidden in a small canyon, a narrow crevice in the rock face, shaded by a few scraggly cottonwood trees. The water was clear and cool, a life-giving oasis in the midst of the arid landscape. Rhett dismounted and helped Ginny down. Her legs were stiff and shaky, and she stumbled slightly. He caught her, his hands strong and steady on her arms. For a moment, they stood there, close together, the silence punctuated by the gentle gurgle of the spring. The air was cooler here, shaded by the canyon walls, and the scent of damp earth and cottonwood leaves filled her senses. He released her, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Rest," he said, gesturing towards a flat rock beneath one of the trees. "I'll take care of the horse." Ginny sank gratefully onto the rock, leaning back against the cool stone. She watched as Rhett unsaddled the stallion, rubbed him down, and led him to the spring to drink. He moved with a quiet efficiency, a grace born of years of practice. He was a man of action, a man of the outdoors, and he seemed utterly at home in this wild, untamed place. She closed her eyes, letting the peace of the canyon seep into her bones. The events of the day, the shock, the fear, the exhilarating escape, had left her drained. But beneath the exhaustion, she felt a stirring of something else, something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of anticipation, of possibility. She had been rescued from a life she hadn't wanted, but what kind of life awaited her now? With an outlaw? In the desert? She looked at Rhett. He was so familiar, yet so changed. The past was a chasm between them, wide and deep. Could they ever bridge it? Or was this flight across the barren lands just a prelude to another kind of heartbreak? The rustling of the cottonwood leaves in the evening breeze seemed to whisper a warning, a reminder of the dangers that lay ahead, both seen and unseen. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Stolen Life. The coolness of the canyon provided a welcome relief from the scorching heat of the day. As the last rays of sunlight faded, casting long shadows across the rocks, Rhett built a small fire, its flickering flames dancing in the gathering darkness. The aroma of burning mesquite filled the air, a familiar, comforting scent that reminded Ginny of countless evenings spent around campfires on the Callahan Ranch. He offered her a strip of dried beef and a canteen of water. The beef was tough and salty, but Ginny devoured it hungrily, realizing she hadn't eaten since the meager breakfast she'd forced down that morning, before her world had been turned upside down. The water was cool and refreshing, washing away the dust and the lingering taste of fear. They ate in silence, the crackling fire the only sound between them. Ginny watched Rhett, his face illuminated by the firelight, his expression unreadable. He seemed lost in his own thoughts, his gaze fixed on the flames. She wondered what he was thinking, what demons he battled in the silence. Finally, she couldn't bear the silence any longer. "Why, Rhett?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why now? After all these years?" He looked up, his blue eyes meeting hers. The firelight flickered in their depths, revealing a flicker of something that might have been pain or regret. He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "I saw Blackwood's announcement in the paper," he said, his voice low and rough. "Your wedding announcement." Ginny frowned. "You read the newspaper?" It seemed incongruous, the image of this rugged outlaw reading a newspaper. He gave a wry smile. "Sometimes. Gotta keep up with what's happening in the world, even if you're living outside of it." He paused. "I couldn't let it happen, Ginny. I couldn't let you marry that snake." His words sent a shiver through her. The vehemence in his voice, the raw emotion, surprised her. "But why?" "We haven't seen each other in 30 years. We're strangers." He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "Are we, Ginny? Are we really strangers?" The intensity of his gaze made her heart pound. She remembered, with sudden clarity, the feel of his hand in hers, the warmth of his body as he'd held her on the horse, the scent of him, the way his eyes had looked at her, as if he could see straight through to her soul. They were strangers, yes, in the sense that they had lived separate lives for 3 decades. But there was a connection, a bond forged in their youth, that time and distance hadn't completely erased. She stammered, unsure of what to say. The memories, long suppressed, came flooding back. The stolen kisses under the moonlight, the whispered promises, the dreams they had shared, the pain of their parting. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. His hand was rough, calloused, but his grip was gentle. "I never forgot you, Ginny," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Not for a single day. The tears, which she had held back for so long, finally spilled over. She hadn't allowed herself to cry, not when Thomas died, not when she'd faced losing the ranch, not even when she'd agreed to marry Samuel Blackwood. But now, sitting here in this hidden canyon, with the man she had once loved, the tears flowed freely. He didn't try to stop her. He simply held her hand, his thumb gently stroking her skin, offering a silent comfort. She cried for the lost years, for the dreams that had been shattered, for the life she had never lived, for the love she had thought she'd buried long ago. When the tears finally subsided, she felt a strange sense of peace, a cleansing that had washed away years of pent-up grief and regret. She looked at Rhett, his face etched with concern, his eyes filled with a tenderness that she hadn't expected. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice hoarse. I don't usually fall apart like that. He smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. You've been through a lot, Ginny. You're allowed to fall apart. He released her hand and stood up, walking over to the fire, adding a few more pieces of wood. The flames leaped higher, casting a warm glow over the canyon. He turned back to her, his expression serious. I know I have a lot to answer for, he said. And I will. But not tonight. Tonight, you need to rest. We have a long journey ahead of us. She nodded, understanding. He was right. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. The weight of her stolen life, the sudden upheaval, the re-emergence of Rhett Mercer, it was all too much to process in one day. He spread out a bedroll near the fire, a thick blanket made of woven wool. Sleep, he said. I'll keep watch. Ginny lay down on the bedroll, pulling the blanket around her. The ground was hard, but the blanket was warm, and the fire provided a comforting sense of security. She watched Rhett, silhouetted against the firelight, his rifle resting across his knees. He was a watchful guardian, a protector, a figure of strength and resilience. She closed her eyes, the image of his face, etched in firelight, imprinted on her mind. She was safe for now. But the questions still lingered, the uncertainties still loomed. Where were they going? What was his plan? And what would become of them? Two souls bound together by a shared past and an uncertain future. The weight of it all pressed down on her, but beneath that weight, a tiny spark of hope flickered, fueled by the embers of a love that had never truly died. The distant howl of a coyote echoed through the canyon, a lonely, mournful sound, but Ginny didn't flinch. She was no longer alone, and that, she realized, made all the difference. Where that hope would take her, only time could tell. Chapter 5. Echoes of a Shared Past. The first rays of dawn painted the canyon walls in hues of rose and gold, chasing away the lingering shadows of the night. Ginny awoke to the smell of coffee brewing over the dying embers of the fire. Rhett was already up, crouched beside the flames, a tin cup in his hand. He looked up as she stirred, a faint smile gracing his lips. Morning, he said, his voice soft, yet carrying the familiar resonance that sent a subtle warmth through her. Sleep well? Better than I expected, she admitted, sitting up and pushing the blanket aside. The stiffness in her muscles had eased somewhat, replaced by a dull ache that was a reminder of the previous day's arduous ride. He handed her a cup of coffee. It was strong and black, just the way she liked it. She took a sip, the hot liquid warming her from the inside out. Thank you, she said, meeting his gaze. They sat in silence for a few moments, sipping their coffee, watching the sunrise paint the sky. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of sage and pine. The canyon was coming to life, the birds singing their morning songs, the insects buzzing around the blooming cacti. Ginny finally broke the silence. Where are we going, Rhett? She asked, her voice steadier now, the initial shock of their escape wearing off, replaced by a growing curiosity and a need for answers. He set his cup down, his gaze shifting towards the distant horizon. West, he said, towards the Arizona territory. I have friends there, a place where we can be safe for a while. Safe from whom? She asked, although she already knew the answer. Blackwood, he said, his voice hardening. He won't give up easily. He's a powerful man with a long reach. And he's not used to being denied what he wants. Ginny shivered, despite the warming air. She knew Samuel Blackwood was ruthless. She had seen the cold calculation in his eyes, the way he treated his employees, his unwavering determination to get what he wanted, no matter the cost. But why Arizona? She persisted. Why not somewhere closer? He hesitated, his gaze shifting away from hers. It's complicated, he said. I have a history there, a past that I need to reckon with. His words intrigued her. She sensed there was more to the story, a hidden layer of complexity that he wasn't yet ready to reveal. She decided not to press him. Not yet. She would give him time, allow him to open up at his own pace. They finished their coffee and packed up their meager belongings. Rhett saddled the stallion, and they set off again, heading west, towards the rising sun. As they rode, Ginny found herself thinking about their shared past, the memories that had been stirred up by Rhett's sudden reappearance. They had grown up together, their families' ranches bordering each other. As children, they had been inseparable, exploring the vast expanse of land, playing games in the creek, sharing secrets under the starry sky. Rhett had always been the adventurous one, the risk-taker, while Ginny had been more cautious, more grounded. But they had complemented each other, their differences drawing them together. Their friendship had blossomed into something more as they reached their teenage years. Stolen kisses in the moonlight, whispered promises of forever, the heady rush of first love. It had been a passionate, all-consuming love, the kind that made them believe they could conquer anything. But their families had been opposed to the relationship. The Callahans were respectable ranchers, while the Mercers had a reputation for being wild, untamed. Rhett's father had been a known gambler, a drinker, a man who lived on the edge of the law. Ginny's parents had forbidden her from seeing Rhett, fearing that he would lead her astray. Then had come that fateful night.
A heated argument, a desperate plea, a tearful goodbye.
Rhett had left Harmony Creek, vowing to make something of himself, to prove that he was worthy of Ginny's love. She had promised to wait for him, but time and distance had taken their toll. Letters had become infrequent, then stopped altogether. Ginny had eventually given up hope, believing that Rhett had forgotten her, that their youthful love had been nothing more than a fleeting dream. She had married Thomas, built a life for herself, tried to bury the memories of Rhett deep in her heart. But now, here he was, riding beside her, a ghost from her past, a reminder of the life she might have had. The echoes of their shared past resonated between them, a bittersweet melody of what had been and what might have been. She wondered if they could ever recapture that lost love, or if the years and the secrets that lay between them had created an insurmountable barrier. The desert stretched before them, vast and unknown, mirroring the uncharted territory of their rekindled relationship. The past was a powerful force, but the future was a blank canvas, waiting to be painted. What colors would they choose? Chapter 6. The Price of Freedom, the Cost of Love. The journey continued, each mile a testament to their resilience, a slow, deliberate escape from the clutches of Ginny's past. The landscape, while beautiful in its darkness, offered little comfort. The sun remained a relentless adversary, and water was a precious commodity, carefully rationed. Rhett proved to be a resourceful and capable guide. He knew the hidden trails, the secret springs, the signs of danger. He hunted small game, providing them with sustenance, and he kept a watchful eye on the horizon, always alert for any sign of pursuit. Ginny, despite her initial weariness, began to adapt to the harsh conditions. She learned to conserve her energy, to appreciate the small comforts, to find beauty in the stark simplicity of the desert. She also began to shed the layers of her former life, the constraints of societal expectations, the burden of obligation. The torn wedding dress, a symbol of her near marriage to Blackwood, became a practical garment. She used strips of the fabric to tie back her hair, to protect her skin from the sun, to bind wounds. The remnants of her former life were slowly being repurposed, transformed into tools for survival. As they rode, they began to talk more openly, sharing stories, revealing pieces of themselves that had been hidden for so long. Rhett spoke of his years wandering the West, working as a cowboy, a ranch hand, a scout. He hinted at darker times, at brushes with the law, but he didn't elaborate. Ginny didn't press him. She sensed that those stories were still too painful, too raw. She, in turn, told him about her life with Thomas, the quiet contentment, the shared burdens, the grief of his passing. She spoke of her struggles to keep the ranch afloat, the constant pressure from the bank, the desperation that had led her to accept Blackwood's proposal. "I was a coward," she confessed, her voice filled with self-reproach. "I should have fought harder. I should have found another way." Rhett reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a familiar warmth through her.
"You did what you had to do, Ginny," he said.
"You were protecting your brother, your family. There's no shame in that." His words were a balm to her soul. She had been carrying the weight of guilt and regret for so long, blaming herself for her choices. Rhett's understanding, his acceptance, lifted a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying. But their newfound closeness was also fraught with tension. The memories of their youthful love, the unspoken desires, the years of separation, created a complex dynamic between them. They were drawn to each other, magnetically, yet held back by fear, by uncertainty, by the ghosts of their past. One evening, as they sat around a small campfire, watching the stars blaze across the vast desert sky, Rhett spoke of the price of freedom. "Out here," he said, his voice low and thoughtful, "freedom comes at a cost. You're constantly looking over your shoulder, always on the run, never truly settled. It's a lonely life." Ginny looked at him, his face illuminated by the firelight, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. She realized that his life as an outlaw, while seemingly romantic and adventurous, had been a life of hardship, of isolation, of constant danger. "Is it worth it?" she asked softly. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes, it's the only choice you have." She understood. She had chosen freedom, too, when she'd agreed to run with him. She had chosen to escape a life of gilded misery, to embrace the unknown, to take a chance on a love that might never be rekindled. But she knew that her freedom, like Rhett's, came at a cost. The cost of leaving behind everything she knew, the cost of facing an uncertain future, the cost of potentially losing her heart all over again. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken emotions. The crackling fire, the vast expanse of the star-studded sky, the sheer isolation of their surroundings, amplified the tension between them. They were two souls, adrift in the wilderness, bound together by a shared past and an uncertain future. Suddenly, Rhett reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. His eyes, those intense blue eyes, searched hers, seeking something, questioning something. "Ginny," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She leaned into his touch, her heart pounding in her chest. The years melted away, and she was transported back to their youth, to the stolen kisses, the whispered promises, the feeling of being completely and utterly loved. But just as their lips were about to meet, a distant sound shattered the moment. The unmistakable sound of horses' hooves, approaching fast. Rhett pulled back instantly, his eyes hardening, his hand reaching for his rifle. "Blackwood," he muttered, his voice grim. "He's found us." The price of freedom, the cost of love, had just become brutally clear. The idyllic interlude was over. The reality of their situation, the danger they faced, came crashing down upon them. They were no longer alone in the wilderness. Their pursuers were closing in, and the fight for their lives and for their love was about to begin. The sound of the approaching horses grew louder, a menacing thunder that echoed the turmoil in Ginny's heart. Chapter 7. Scars Beneath the Surface. The approaching riders were a dark cloud on the horizon, their numbers growing with each terrifying second. Rhett swiftly extinguished the fire, plunging them into near total darkness, the faint glow of the stars their only illumination. He helped Ginny onto the stallion, his movements quick and efficient, honed by years of living on the edge. "Hold on tight," he whispered, his voice urgent, his breath warm against her ear. "And don't look back." He swung into the saddle behind her, his arms encircling her, his body a shield against the impending danger. He spurred the stallion into a gallop, the horse's powerful muscles bunching and stretching as it raced across the uneven terrain. The wind whipped through Ginny's hair, stinging her eyes, but she didn't dare close them. She kept her gaze fixed on the path ahead, trusting Rhett to guide them through the darkness. The sound of pursuit grew louder, closer. Gunshots rang out, the bullets whizzing past them, kicking up dust and rocks. Ginny flinched, pressing closer to Rhett, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. "They're gaining on us," she cried, her voice trembling. "We'll lose them in the canyons," Rhett said, his voice calm and reassuring, despite the danger. "I know this land better than they do." He veered off the main trail, guiding the stallion into a narrow, winding canyon, its walls rising steeply on either side. The darkness was deeper here, the air cooler, the silence broken only by the pounding of the horses' hooves and the ragged breaths of Ginny and Rhett. They rode for what seemed like an eternity, twisting and turning through the labyrinthine canyons, the sound of pursuit gradually fading behind them. Finally, Rhett slowed the stallion to a walk, his body tense, his senses alert. "We've lost them for now," he said, his voice low. "But they'll be back. We need to find a place to hide, somewhere they won't find us." He led the stallion deeper into the canyon, to a small, hidden cave, concealed behind a thick outcropping of rock. It was a tight squeeze, but the cave offered a measure of protection, a temporary sanctuary from their pursuers. They dismounted, their legs stiff and aching. Rhett unsaddled the stallion, allowing it to graze on the sparse vegetation that grew near the cave entrance. Ginny sank to the ground, leaning back against the cool rock wall, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. Rhett sat down beside her, his rifle resting across his knees. He looked at her, his face etched with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I think so," she said, her voice shaky. "Just scared." He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a wave of warmth through her chilled body. "I won't let anything happen to you, Ginny," he said, his voice firm. "I promise." His words were reassuring, but she knew the danger was far from over. Blackwood was relentless, and he wouldn't rest until he had her back. And Rhett, she was beginning to realize that the man she had once loved was a man with a past, a man with secrets, a man who lived on the edge of the law. As they sat in the darkness, waiting for the dawn, Ginny noticed a long, jagged scar on Rhett's arm, partially hidden by the sleeve of his shirt. It was a scar she hadn't seen before, a testament to the hard life he had lived. "What happened?" she asked, her voice soft, gesturing towards the scar. He followed her gaze, his expression darkening. He hesitated for a moment, as if reluctant to speak. "It was a long time ago," he said. "A fight. Over a woman." "A woman." The words hung in the air, a silent reminder of the complexities of his life, the choices he had made, the consequences he had faced. Ginny felt a pang of jealousy, a sharp, unexpected pain. She had no right to feel jealous, she knew. She had been married, had lived her own life. But the thought of Rhett with another woman, fighting for another woman, stirred up emotions she had thought she'd buried long ago. "Was she important to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and regret.
"She was," he said.
"But it was a mistake. A youthful folly. It cost me dearly." He didn't elaborate, and Ginny didn't press him. She sensed that the story was too painful, too deeply buried. But the scar, and his words, revealed a glimpse of the man beneath the surface, the man who had been hurt, the man who had made mistakes, the man who was still capable of love. The scars beneath the surface, both physical and emotional, were a reminder of the battles they had both fought, the wounds they had both endured. They were two souls, scarred by life, seeking solace in each other's company, clinging to a fragile hope in the midst of danger. The cave, a temporary refuge, became a symbol of their shared vulnerability, their shared need for protection, their shared longing for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. The silence stretched between them, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with unspoken emotions, with shared understanding, with the growing realization that their connection ran deeper than they had ever imagined. The darkness hid their tears, but it couldn't hide the truth that was slowly dawning on them both. Their love, rekindled in the fires of adversity, was a force to be reckoned with, a force that might just be strong enough to overcome the obstacles that lay ahead. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. Chapter 8. Shadows of Betrayal and Longing. The cave, though small and damp, offered a reprieve from the relentless sun and the constant threat of pursuit. They spent the day in its relative safety, resting, conserving their energy, and waiting for nightfall. Rhett cleaned and oiled his rifle, his movements precise and practiced, while Ginny tended to the stallion, brushing its coat and checking its hooves. The silence between them was punctuated by the occasional shared glance, a touch of hands, a silent acknowledgement of their shared predicament. The forced intimacy of their confinement amplified the unspoken emotions, the memories, the desires that simmered beneath the surface. As the day wore on, Ginny couldn't shake the image of the scar on Rhett's arm, the story he hadn't fully told. She wanted to know more, to understand the man he had become, the experiences that had shaped him. But she hesitated, afraid of opening old wounds, of jeopardizing the fragile bond that was forming between them. Finally, as the shadows lengthened and the light outside the cave began to fade, she decided to broach the subject. "Rhett," she said, her voice soft, about that scar the woman he looked up from his rifle, his expression guarded. He knew what she was asking. He sighed, leaning back against the cave wall, his gaze fixed on the entrance, as if searching for answers in the fading light. "Her name was Elena," he said, his voice low and tinged with regret. "She was beautiful, fiery, passionate. We met in a small town in Texas, a border town, full of trouble." He paused, his gaze drifting inward, as if reliving the memories. "I was young, reckless, full of myself. I thought I could conquer the world. I fell for her hard. She was everything I thought I wanted." Ginny listened intently, her heart aching for the young Rhett, the naive, impulsive boy he had been. She could picture him, full of swagger and charm, falling head over heels for a beautiful woman. "But she was also dangerous," Rhett continued, his voice hardening. "She was involved with the wrong kind of people. Outlaws, smugglers, men who lived outside the law." He hesitated again, his hand unconsciously moving to the scar on his arm. "I got caught up in their world, their schemes. I did things I'm not proud of. Things that got me into trouble. The fight, the scar, it all started to make sense." Ginny realized that Rhett's life as an outlaw hadn't been a choice, not entirely. It had been a consequence, a result of his youthful mistakes, his love for a woman who had led him astray. "The fight," she prompted gently. "It was over her," he said, his voice bitter.
"A rival."
"A man who wanted what I had. We fought, and I nearly died. Elena, she nursed me back to health. But after that I knew I had to get out. I had to leave that life behind." He left that life, only after almost losing his. "So I ran," he concluded. "I came to Arizona, tried to start over, tried to make amends for my past." His story, though incomplete, revealed a depth of character she hadn't fully appreciated. He wasn't just a reckless outlaw, a charming rogue. He was a man who had made mistakes, who had paid the price, who was trying to redeem himself. Ginny reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I understand," she said, her voice filled with empathy. "We all have things in our past that we regret. We all make mistakes." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers. "But you, Ginny," he said, "you were always good.
Pure.
You didn't deserve to be dragged into my mess." She squeezed his hand. "I made my choice, Rhett," she said. "I chose to come with you. And I don't regret it." Her words, her unwavering support, seemed to ease a burden he had been carrying for years. He leaned closer, his face inches from hers, his eyes filled with a longing that mirrored her own. "Ginny," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. But before he could finish the sentence, a sound from outside the cave interrupted them. The faint but unmistakable sound of horses' hooves, approaching slowly, cautiously. Rhett instantly stiffened, his hand moving to his rifle. "They found us," he said, his voice grim. Again, the shadows of betrayal and longing that had filled the cave were suddenly replaced by the stark reality of danger. Their moment of intimacy, their shared vulnerability, was shattered. The fight for survival, for freedom, was once again upon them. The sound of the approaching horses grew closer, a menacing reminder of the forces that were arrayed against them, the forces that threatened to tear them apart. The past, it seemed, was not yet finished with them, and the future remained a terrifying, exhilarating uncertainty. Chapter 9. The Unforgiving Desert's Embrace. Rhett cautiously peered out of the cave entrance, his rifle at the ready. The last vestiges of daylight were fading, casting long, distorted shadows across the canyon floor. He could make out 3 figures on horseback, slowly making their way towards the cave, their movements deliberate, their intentions clear. "It's Blackwood," he muttered, his voice tight with anger and frustration. "And 2 of his men. They must have tracked us." Ginny's heart pounded in her chest. She had hoped they had lost their pursuers, that they had found a moment of respite, a chance to regroup. But Blackwood's relentless pursuit, his unwavering determination to reclaim her, had shattered that illusion. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Rhett's mind raced, calculating their options. The cave was a defensible position, but it was also a trap. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in a narrow canyon with only one way out. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll bottle us up, pick us off. We need to make a run for it. Try to reach the open desert. There's a chance we can lose them in the darkness." It was a risky plan, a desperate gamble, but they had no other choice. Staying in the cave meant certain capture, or worse. He turned to Ginny, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and concern. "It's going to be dangerous," he said, "but I'll do everything I can to protect you. Stay close to me, and do exactly what I say." She nodded, her fear tempered by a growing trust in Rhett, a belief in his ability to get them through this. She had seen his resourcefulness, his courage, his unwavering determination. She knew he would fight for her, for their freedom, to the very end. They waited until the riders were almost upon the cave, then Rhett gave the signal. He burst out of the cave, firing his rifle, the shots echoing through the canyon. Ginny followed close behind, scrambling onto the stallion as Rhett swung into the saddle. The sudden attack caught Blackwood and his men by surprise. One of them went down, his horse rearing in panic. Rhett fired again, hitting another man in the shoulder. Blackwood, enraged, returned fire, his bullets whizzing past them. Rhett spurred the stallion into a gallop, racing out of the canyon and into the open desert. The darkness was their ally, concealing them from their pursuers, but it was also their enemy, making the terrain treacherous, the path uncertain. They rode hard, the stallion's hooves pounding the earth, the wind whipping through their hair. Ginny clung to Rhett, her arms wrapped tightly around his waist, her face pressed against his back. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was mingled with a sense of exhilaration, a thrill of adrenaline. The gunshots continued behind them, but they were becoming more sporadic, less accurate. Rhett's knowledge of the terrain, his ability to navigate in the darkness, was giving them an advantage. But the desert, while offering a chance of escape, was also unforgiving. The terrain was rough, uneven, filled with hidden dangers. The stallion stumbled, nearly throwing them both. Ginny gasped, her grip tightening around Rhett. He managed to keep the horse upright, but the near fall had slowed them down, allowing Blackwood and his remaining man to close the gap. "We need to find cover," Ginny cried, her voice strained. Rhett scanned the horizon, his eyes searching for any sign of shelter. In the distance, he spotted a cluster of rocks, a small outcropping that might offer some protection. "There," he said, pointing towards the rocks. "We'll make a stand there." He urged the stallion towards the rocks, their only hope in the vast, unforgiving expanse of the desert. The gunshots were getting closer again, the bullets kicking up dust around them. They were running out of time, running out of options. The unforgiving desert's embrace, once a symbol of freedom, had become a battleground. Their lives, their love, hung in the balance. The darkness was both their shield and their shroud. And the outcome of their desperate flight remained uncertain, a question mark etched against the vast, star-studded canvas of the night sky. The odds were stacked against them, but they were not ready to give up. They would fight for their lives, for their freedom, for the chance to build a future together, a future that seemed increasingly precarious with each passing moment. Chapter 10. A Haven in the Storm. The cluster of rocks, a jumble of boulders and scrub brush, offered a meager but desperately needed sanctuary. Rhett reined in the stallion, leaping from the saddle and pulling Ginny down with him. He quickly led the horse behind the largest boulder, shielding it from view. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice low and urgent. "And keep quiet." He positioned himself behind a rock, his rifle leveled, his eyes scanning the desert, waiting for Blackwood and his man to appear. The silence was broken only by the heavy breathing of the horse and the frantic beat of Ginny's heart. The darkness was almost complete, the moon obscured by a thin layer of clouds. Visibility was limited, making it difficult to see their pursuers, but also making it difficult for them to be seen. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Ginny huddled behind the rock, her body trembling, her senses on high alert. She could hear the faint sound of horses' hooves, growing closer, then fading away, then growing closer again. Blackwood was searching for them, systematically, relentlessly. Suddenly, a shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the rock in front of Rhett. He returned fire, his shots echoing through the stillness of the night. A brief, intense firefight ensued, the flashes of gunfire illuminating the darkness, the smell of gunpowder filling the air. Ginny crouched lower, pressing herself against the cold, hard rock. She closed her eyes, praying for Rhett's safety, praying for a miracle. The gunshots stopped as abruptly as they had begun. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the gunfire. Ginny held her breath, listening intently, straining to hear any sound that might indicate the presence of their pursuers. "They're circling around," Rhett whispered, his voice tight with tension. "Trying to flank us. We're trapped." He was right. They were surrounded, their position compromised. Their meager sanctuary had become a potential death trap. Ginny looked at Rhett, his face illuminated by the faint starlight. He was calm, resolute, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. He wouldn't give up. He wouldn't let Blackwood win. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He thought for a moment, his mind racing, searching for a way out. Then, his eyes lit up, a flicker of hope in their depths.
"There's a small pass," he said.
"Through the rocks. Just big enough for a horse. It's a long shot, but it's our only chance." It was a desperate gamble, a narrow passage through the rocks, a potential escape route that might also lead to an ambush. But they had no other options. He crawled over to Ginny, his hand reaching for hers. "We'll go together," he said. "On foot. Leave the horse. It'll only slow us down." She nodded, her trust in him unwavering. She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his touch. They waited for a moment, listening for any sign of movement from Blackwood and his man. Then Rhett gave the signal. They crept out from behind the rocks, moving slowly, silently, staying low to the ground, using the shadows as cover. They reached the entrance to the pass, a narrow crevice between two towering boulders. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, let alone a horse. Rhett went first, his rifle held in front of him, his senses on high alert. Ginny followed close behind, her heart pounding in her chest. They made their way through the pass, inch by inch, the rough rock scraping against their skin. The darkness was complete, the silence absolute. Ginny could feel Rhett's body in front of her, his warmth a reassuring presence in the cold, unforgiving darkness. Suddenly, a voice shattered the silence. "Hold it right there, Mercer." It was Blackwood. He had found them. Rhett froze, his body tensing. Ginny gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. They were trapped, caught in the narrow pass, with no way to escape. But then, something unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the darkness, not Blackwood, but a woman. A woman with long, dark hair and piercing eyes. A woman Ginny had never seen before. "Let them go, Samuel," the woman said, her voice firm, authoritative.
"This ends now."
Blackwood emerged from behind the woman, his face contorted with rage.
"Who are you?"
he demanded. "What is the meaning of this?" The woman ignored him. She looked at Rhett, her eyes softening slightly. "It's all right, Rhett," she said. "You're safe now." Rhett lowered his rifle, his body relaxing slightly. He knew this woman. He trusted her. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with relief. "What are you doing here?" "I came to help," she said. "I have friends, too. And a haven where you both can rest and be safe." Ginny stared at the woman, Sarah, her mind reeling. Who was she? What was her connection to Rhett? And what was this haven she spoke of? The desert, it seemed, still held secrets, still held surprises. And their journey, their fight for freedom, was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, Ginny felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of relief. They had found a haven, a temporary respite from the storm. But the questions lingered, the uncertainties remained. And the future, while no longer as bleak, was still shrouded in mystery. The presence of this new, unexpected ally was both a blessing and a question mark. Chapter 11. Whispers of Doubt and Desire. Sarah led them through the darkness, navigating the treacherous terrain with an ease that suggested she knew this land intimately. She was a striking woman, tall and lean, with a quiet strength that radiated from her. Her clothes were simple and practical, suited for riding and living in the harsh desert environment. Ginny, still reeling from the near capture and the unexpected intervention, studied Sarah surreptitiously, trying to decipher her relationship with Rhett. There was a familiarity between them, a comfortable ease that suggested a history, a shared past. But there was also a distance, a reserve, that hinted at something more complex, something unspoken. Rhett walked beside Sarah, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his demeanor relaxed, his guard seemingly down. He trusted this woman. That much was clear. But Ginny couldn't shake a feeling of unease, a nagging doubt that whispered in the back of her mind. They reached a small, secluded settlement, nestled in a hidden valley, surrounded by towering cliffs. It was a collection of modest adobe buildings, a few corrals for horses, a well and a garden. It was a haven, a place of refuge, a world away from the harsh realities of the open desert. Sarah led them to a small, sparsely furnished adobe house.
You can stay here, she said.
Rest, recover. You're safe now. She provided them with food, water, and blankets. The food was simple, but nourishing: stew, bread, and dried fruit. Ginny ate hungrily, realizing how depleted her reserves were. After they had eaten, Sarah left them, promising to return in the morning. Rhett and Ginny were alone again, the silence between them thick with unspoken questions, with the lingering tension of their near capture, with the added complexity of Sarah's arrival. Ginny finally broke the silence. Who is she, Rhett? She asked, her voice soft, yet laced with a hint of suspicion. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Sarah is a friend, he said. Someone I've known for a long time. Someone I trust. His answer was vague, evasive. It didn't satisfy Ginny's curiosity, nor did it quell her unease. A friend? She pressed. Or something more? He met her gaze, his blue eyes searching hers. We have a history, he admitted. A complicated one, but it's in the past. His words, his tone, did little to reassure her. The image of the scar on his arm, the story of Elena, the way Sarah had looked at him, the familiarity between them, it all added up to something more than just friendship. Ginny felt a pang of jealousy, a sharp, unexpected pain. She had no right to feel jealous, she knew. She had been married, had lived her own life. But the thought of Rhett with another woman, with this woman who had so effortlessly saved them, stirred up emotions she had thought she'd buried long ago. Is she like Elena? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He frowned, his expression darkening. No, he said firmly. Sarah is nothing like Elena.
She's different.
She's good. His defense of Sarah, his vehemence, only fueled Ginny's doubts. She wondered if he was being entirely truthful, if he was still harboring feelings for this woman, this friend who had appeared out of nowhere. The silence stretched between them again, this time heavier, more strained. The unspoken questions, the doubts, the desires, created a wall between them, a barrier that seemed insurmountable. Rhett reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a shiver through her.
Ginny, he said, his voice soft, earnest.
I know you're confused. I know you have doubts. But I care about you.
Deeply.
What we're starting to have again, it's real.
It's important to me.
His words, his touch, were sincere. She could feel the truth in them. But the doubts still lingered. The whispers of uncertainty still echoed in her mind. She looked at him, her eyes searching his. "I want to believe you, Rhett," she said. "I do. But it's hard. There's so much I don't know. So much you haven't told me." He squeezed her hand. "I will," he promised. "In time. But for now, trust me. Please. Trust." It was a fragile thing, easily broken, hard to rebuild. Could she trust him? Could she trust her own feelings? Could she trust this newfound haven, this woman who had saved them? She closed her eyes, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. She was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. She needed time, space, to process everything that had happened. "I need to rest," she said, her voice weary. He nodded, understanding. He released her hand and stood up, walking over to the window, looking out at the star-studded sky. Ginny lay down on the bedroll, pulling the blanket around her. The adobe house was cool and quiet, a welcome change from the harshness of the desert. But sleep eluded her. Her mind raced, replaying the events of the past few days. The escape, the pursuit, Sarah's arrival. She looked at Rhett, his silhouette outlined against the window, his back to her. He was a mystery, an enigma, a man with a past, a man with secrets. And yet, she was drawn to him, irresistibly, her heart aching for a connection that seemed both inevitable and impossible. The whispers of doubt and desire mingled in her mind, creating a symphony of confusion, a melody of longing, a testament to the complexities of love and trust in a world where nothing was certain, where everything was at stake. The haven, while offering a temporary respite, was also a crucible, a place where their feelings would be tested, where their past would collide with their present, where their future would be forged. Or shattered. Chapter 12. The Sheriff's Relentless Pursuit. The next morning, Sarah brought them breakfast. Fresh bread, cheese, and fruit from the garden. She was friendly and welcoming, but Ginny still felt a sense of reserve, a lingering unease that she couldn't quite shake. "You're safe here," Sarah reiterated, her gaze shifting between Rhett and Ginny. "This valley is well hidden. Blackwood won't find you." "How can you be so sure?" Ginny asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. Sarah smiled, a knowing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I have ways," she said. "And friends. In high places and low." Her words were cryptic, hinting at a network of influence, a web of connections that Ginny couldn't quite grasp. It was clear that Sarah was a woman of power, a woman who knew how to navigate the treacherous world of the Arizona Territory. After breakfast, Sarah led them on a tour of the settlement. It was small, but self-sufficient, with a thriving garden, a well-stocked pantry, and a sense of community that was palpable. The people who lived there were a diverse group: former outlaws, ranchers who had lost their land, Native Americans seeking refuge from the encroaching white settlers. They were all, in their own way, seeking a new beginning, a place to escape the past and build a better future. Rhett seemed to know many of the residents, greeting them by name, sharing stories, laughing with them. He was clearly at home here, comfortable in this community of outcasts and survivors. Ginny watched him, her heart aching with a mixture of longing and confusion. She wanted to be a part of his world, to share his life, but she still felt like an outsider, a stranger in a strange land. As they walked, Sarah explained her vision for the settlement. "I want to create a place where people can live in peace," she said. "Where they can be free from persecution, from judgment, from the harsh realities of the outside world." Her words were noble, idealistic. But Ginny couldn't help but wonder if such a utopia was truly possible, especially in this lawless, unforgiving territory. Later that day, as Ginny was helping Sarah in the garden, she decided to broach the subject that had been weighing on her mind. "Sarah," she said, her voice hesitant. "You and Rhett, you have a history, don't you?" Sarah looked up from her work, her expression unreadable. She paused for a moment, as if considering her response. "Yes," she said finally. "We do. We were close, once." Ginny waited, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed to know the truth, even if it hurt. We were lovers, Sarah admitted, her voice low, almost a whisper. Years ago. Before everything changed. The words hit Ginny like a physical blow. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed, hearing Sarah say the words, was still painful. What changed? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Sarah sighed, leaning back against a tree, her gaze drifting towards the distant mountains. Rhett, he got into trouble, she said. Serious trouble. He had to leave. He had to change his life. It was the same story Rhett had told her, the same vague explanation, the same hints of a darker past. But hearing it from Sarah, from the woman who had once loved him, gave it a new weight, a new reality. And you helped him, Ginny said, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and resentment. Sarah nodded. I did what I could, she said. I still care about him. I always will. Her words, her tone, confirmed what Ginny had already suspected. Sarah still loved Rhett, and that love, that history, created a barrier between Ginny and Rhett, a shadow that loomed over their rekindled relationship. Before Ginny could respond, a shout rang out from the edge of the settlement. Riders approaching. A wave of panic swept through the community. People scrambled for cover, grabbing weapons, preparing for the worst. Rhett emerged from one of the buildings, his rifle in hand, his expression grim. It's not Blackwood, Sarah said, her voice calm, reassuring. It's the sheriff. From Tucson. The sheriff. Ginny's heart sank. She had hoped they were safe here, that they had escaped the reach of the law. But it seemed that their past, their actions, had caught up with them. The sheriff, a tall, imposing figure with a stern face and a steely gaze, rode into the settlement, accompanied by 2 deputies. He dismounted, his hand resting on his gun, his eyes scanning the faces of the people gathered before him. I'm looking for Rhett Mercer, he said, his voice booming through the silence. And Virginia Callahan. They're wanted for questioning, in connection with the disruption of a wedding, and the abduction of a bride. The sheriff's words, his relentless pursuit, cast a long shadow over the fragile peace of the haven. The past, it seemed, was not so easily escaped. And the future, once again, was uncertain. The whispers of doubt had been replaced by the harsh reality of the law, a law that was closing in on them, threatening to tear them apart. Ginny looked at Rhett and found him staring back with fire. Chapter 13. Bonds forged in fire. A tense silence descended upon the settlement. The residents, a motley collection of individuals seeking refuge, looked to Sarah and Rhett, their faces a mixture of fear and defiance. The sheriff's presence was a stark reminder of the precariousness of their sanctuary, the ever-present threat of the outside world. Rhett stepped forward, his rifle lowered, but his stance firm, his eyes unwavering. I'm Rhett Mercer, he said, his voice calm and steady. And this is Virginia Callahan. Ginny moved to stand beside him, her hand reaching for his. Their fingers intertwined, a silent affirmation of their bond, their shared defiance in the face of adversity. The sheriff's gaze shifted between them, his expression assessing, calculating. You're both wanted for questioning, he repeated, his voice devoid of emotion. In connection with the events in Harmony Creek. We did nothing wrong, Rhett said. Virginia was being forced into a marriage she didn't want. I helped her escape. That's not how Samuel Blackwood tells it, the sheriff said, his voice laced with skepticism. He claims you kidnapped her at gunpoint. He's lying, Ginny spoke up, her voice trembling slightly, but filled with conviction. I went with Rhett willingly. I would have done anything to escape that marriage. The sheriff looked at her, his gaze softening slightly. He could see the truth in her eyes, the desperation, the relief. But he was also a man of the law, bound by duty, obligated to uphold the law, regardless of his personal feelings. I have a warrant for your arrest, he said, his voice regretful. Both of you. I have to take you in. Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm and authoritative. Sheriff, she said, I understand your position. But I can vouch for these 2. They're under my protection. They're guests in my home. The sheriff looked at Sarah, his expression intrigued. He knew her reputation, her influence, her network of connections. She was not a woman to be trifled with. I respect you, Sarah, he said. But I have a job to do. I can't just ignore a warrant. I'm not asking you to ignore it, Sarah said. I'm asking you to delay it.
Give me time to sort things out.
To prove their innocence. The sheriff hesitated, weighing his options. He knew that arresting Rhett and Ginny, especially in Sarah's settlement, could be complicated. It could lead to violence, to resistance, to a situation that could quickly spiral out of control. What do you propose? He asked, his voice cautious.
Give me 24 hours, Sarah said.
Let me talk to Blackwood. Let me persuade him to drop the charges.
If I can't, then you can take them in.
No resistance. I give you my word. The sheriff considered her offer, his gaze shifting between Sarah, Rhett, and Ginny. He was a pragmatic man, a man who preferred to avoid unnecessary conflict. He also knew that Sarah's word was her bond. 24 hours, he said finally. That's all I can give you. If Blackwood doesn't drop the charges by then, I'll be back. With more men. He turned and mounted his horse, his deputies following suit. They rode out of the settlement, leaving behind a tense silence and a lingering sense of unease. Rhett let out a long sigh, his body relaxing slightly.
Thank you, Sarah, he said. You bought us some time.
Time is all we have, Sarah said, her voice grim. We need to use it wisely. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah sent messages to her contacts, pulling strings, calling in favors, trying to reach Blackwood, to negotiate a deal, to find a way to resolve the situation peacefully. Rhett and Ginny, meanwhile, were left to grapple with the uncertainty of their fate, the precariousness of their situation. They spent the time together, talking, sharing stories, trying to find solace in each other's company. The bonds between them, forged in the fires of adversity, grew stronger. They had faced danger together, had relied on each other, had found a connection that transcended their shared past, their present challenges. Ginny realized that she was falling in love with Rhett all over again, not the reckless, impulsive boy she had known, but the man he had become, the man who had faced hardship, who had made mistakes, who was trying to redeem himself. Rhett, in turn, saw in Ginny a strength, a resilience, a spirit that he admired, a love that he cherished. He knew that he had put her in danger, that he had disrupted her life, but he also knew that he would do anything to protect her, to keep her safe, to build a future with her. As the hours ticked by, the tension mounted. The deadline loomed, the threat of arrest, of separation, hung over them like a dark cloud. They clung to each other, finding comfort in their shared embrace, their whispered promises, their unwavering hope. The bonds forged in fire were being tested, stretched to their limit. But they held firm, a testament to the power of love, the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring hope for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain, yet increasingly precious. The fate of their love, their freedom, rested on Sarah's efforts, on the whims of a powerful, vengeful man, on the fragile balance between law and justice. Chapter 14. Unmasking the Hidden Truths. The 24 hours stretched, taut and agonizing, filled with a quiet desperation. Sarah worked tirelessly, communicating with her contacts through a network of messengers, her face etched with a mixture of determination and growing concern. Rhett paced restlessly, his hand often straying to the rifle he kept close, while Ginny tried to find solace in the mundane tasks of daily life in the settlement, helping with the cooking, tending the garden, anything to distract herself from the impending deadline. As evening approached, Sarah returned, her expression grim. I've spoken to Blackwood, she said, her voice weary. He's unyielding. He wants Ginny back, and he wants Rhett to pay. A wave of despair washed over Ginny. She had hoped for a miracle, for a peaceful resolution, but Blackwood's vindictiveness, his obsession with possessing her, seemed insurmountable. Rhett's jaw tightened, his eyes hardening. Then we fight, he said, his voice low and resolute. We run. We disappear. He'll never find us. Sarah shook her head.
It's not that simple, Rhett, she said.
Blackwood has influence. He has connections. He can reach everywhere. Running is not a solution. Not anymore. She paused, her gaze shifting between Rhett and Ginny. There's something else, she said, her voice hesitant. Something I discovered. Something that might change things. She reached into a pouch she carried at her waist and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was old, yellowed, the ink faded, but still legible.
This is a letter, she said.
From Thomas Callahan, Ginny's late husband, to Samuel Blackwood. Ginny gasped, her heart pounding in her chest. A letter from Thomas?
To Blackwood?
What could it possibly say? Sarah unfolded the letter and began to read, her voice trembling slightly. The words, written in Thomas's familiar hand, were a revelation, a bombshell that shattered Ginny's understanding of her past, of her marriage, of everything she thought she knew. The letter detailed a secret agreement between Thomas and Blackwood, a deal made years ago, when the Callahan ranch had first faced financial ruin. Blackwood had offered Thomas a loan, a substantial sum of money, to save the ranch. But the terms of the loan were unusual. In exchange for the loan, Thomas had agreed to a future marriage. A marriage between Ginny and Blackwood, should Thomas pass away before the debt was repaid. Ginny stared at Sarah, her mind reeling, her body numb with shock. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Thomas, her kind, gentle husband, had sold her? He had made a deal, a pact with the devil, to ensure the survival of the ranch, at the expense of her happiness, her freedom. It can't be true, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. It is, Sarah said, her voice filled with sympathy.
I'm sorry, Ginny.
I know this is difficult, but it's the truth. The letter went on to explain that Thomas had always intended to repay the debt, to free Ginny from the obligation. But the drought, the mounting losses, had made it impossible. He had died, leaving Ginny bound by a secret agreement, a debt she didn't even know existed. Rhett's reaction was swift and furious. That bastard. He snarled. He used you, Ginny. He used you both. He paced the room, his anger radiating from him like heat from a furnace. He wanted to lash out, to seek revenge, to make Blackwood pay for his treachery. But Sarah held up a hand, stopping him.
There's more, she said.
The letter also reveals something else. Something about Blackwood. Something that could help us. She continued reading. The final paragraph of the letter contained a cryptic reference to Blackwood's past, to a shady deal, a land grab, a crime he had committed years ago, before he had become the wealthy, influential landowner he was today. Thomas had stumbled upon the evidence, had used it as leverage to secure a more favorable loan, but he had never revealed the details, fearing Blackwood's retaliation. This could be our chance, Sarah said, her eyes gleaming with a newfound hope. If we can find this evidence, if we can expose Blackwood's past, we can discredit him. We can force him to drop the charges.
We can free ourselves.
The revelation, the unmasking of the hidden truths, had shifted the balance of power. They were no longer just running, hiding, defending themselves. They had a weapon, a chance to fight back, to expose Blackwood's hypocrisy, to bring him down. Ginny, still reeling from the shock of Thomas's betrayal, felt a surge of anger, a fierce determination to make Blackwood pay for what he had done, for the years of manipulation, for the threat he posed to her and Rhett. We need to find that evidence, she said, her voice firm, resolute. We need to expose him. We need to end this. The hidden truths, revealed in the flickering lamplight, had transformed their despair into a burning desire for justice. The bonds forged in fire were now tempered by a shared purpose, a common enemy, a determination to fight for their freedom, for their love, for their future. The clock was still ticking, the sheriff's deadline still loomed, but they were no longer passive victims. They were active agents, ready to confront their past, to challenge their present, to shape their own destiny. The unmasking of Blackwood had begun, and the outcome remained uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, they had a fighting chance. A real one. Chapter 15. The line between outlaw and savior. The revelation of Thomas's letter had ignited a new fire within them, a burning desire for justice that replaced the fear and uncertainty of the previous days. They knew they had a limited amount of time before the sheriff returned, but they were determined to use every moment to find the evidence that could expose Blackwood's past and secure their freedom. Sarah, with her knowledge of the territory and her network of contacts, took the lead. She identified the area where Blackwood had operated years ago, a remote, sparsely populated region known for its lawlessness and its hidden secrets. It was a dangerous place, a place where outlaws and criminals often sought refuge, a place where the truth could easily be buried, forgotten. Rhett, with his experience living on the edge of the law, his knowledge of the underworld, his ability to navigate the treacherous landscape, was the natural choice to lead the search. Ginny, despite her lack of experience in such matters, insisted on going with him. She was no longer the passive, obedient woman she had once been. The events of the past few weeks had awakened a strength, a resilience, a spirit of defiance that she hadn't known she possessed. "I'm not staying behind," she said firmly, meeting Rhett's gaze. "This is my fight, too. Blackwood has wronged me, used me. I want to be there when he faces justice." Rhett hesitated, his concern for her safety warring with his respect for her determination. He knew the dangers they faced, the risks involved. But he also knew that he couldn't deny her request, that he wouldn't want to. "All right," he said finally, his voice softening. "We go together. But you stay close to me, and you do exactly what I say." She nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She was stepping into a world she had never known, a world of outlaws and criminals, a world of danger and uncertainty. But she was doing it with Rhett, the man she loved, the man who had rescued her, the man who had become her partner, her protector, her equal. They set off early the next morning, leaving Sarah behind to manage the settlement and to keep the sheriff at bay, should he return sooner than expected. They rode for hours, the landscape growing increasingly desolate, the signs of civilization fading away. As they rode, Rhett spoke of his past, filling in the gaps in his story, revealing the details he had previously withheld. He told her about his time in Texas, his involvement with Elena and her outlaw gang, the crimes he had committed, the mistakes he had made. "I was young, foolish," he said, his voice filled with regret. "I thought I was invincible. I thought I could get away with anything. But I was wrong. I learned the hard way." He told her about the fight, the scar, the near-death experience that had finally opened his eyes, that had made him realize he needed to change his life. He had left Texas, had come to Arizona, had tried to start over, to make amends for his past. Ginny listened intently, her heart aching for the young Rhett, the lost, misguided boy he had been. She understood his mistakes, his regrets, his desire for redemption. She saw in him a good man, a man who had been led astray, a man who was trying to find his way back to the light. As they neared the area where Blackwood had operated, they encountered a small, run-down settlement, a collection of shacks and tents, a haven for outlaws and drifters. Rhett knew this place, had spent time here in his younger days. He knew the people, the customs, the dangers. He cautioned Ginny to stay close, to be wary, to trust no one. The line between outlaw and savior was blurred here, a shifting, uncertain boundary that could easily be crossed. They entered the settlement cautiously, their presence attracting curious stares, suspicious glances. Rhett approached an old, weathered man sitting outside one of the shacks, a man he recognized from his past. "I'm looking for information," Rhett said, his voice low and guarded. "About Samuel Blackwood. From years ago. Before he became the respectable landowner he is today." The old man eyed him suspiciously, his gaze shifting between Rhett and Ginny. He was hesitant to talk, reluctant to reveal any secrets that might put him in danger. Rhett slipped him a few coins, a bribe, a gesture that spoke louder than words. The old man's eyes lit up, his reluctance fading away. "Blackwood," he said, his voice raspy, his words slurred. "I remember him. He was ruthless, ambitious. He wanted it all, and he didn't care who he hurt to get it." He told them a A tale of greed and betrayal, of a land grab orchestrated by Blackwood, of a family dispossessed, of a murder covered up. The details were murky, the evidence circumstantial, but the story had the ring of truth. There was a witness, the old man said. A young woman. She saw everything. She disappeared. Some say Blackwood silenced her. Others say she escaped. No one knows for sure. A witness. A young woman. A glimmer of hope. If they could find this woman, if they could get her to testify, they could expose Blackwood. They could bring him to justice. The line between outlaw and savior had become clear. Rhett, the former outlaw, was now seeking justice, seeking to right the wrongs of the past. Ginny, the former victim, was now his partner, his ally, his strength. They were fighting for their freedom, for their love, for a future that seemed within reach, yet still precarious, still threatened by the shadows of the past. The search for the witness, the quest for justice had begun. And the outcome remained uncertain, but their determination, their bond, their shared purpose, gave them a strength they had never known before. The desert held its breath, waiting to see if they would succeed. Chapter 16. A love worth fighting for. The old man's words, though vague, provided a crucial lead, a thread to follow in the tangled web of Blackwood's past. He had mentioned a name, a whisper of a woman who had witnessed Blackwood's crimes, Maria. Finding her, after all these years, seemed like an impossible task, a needle in a vast, unforgiving haystack. But it was their only hope. Rhett, with his knowledge of the territory and his connections to the underworld, began the search. He questioned the residents of the settlement, offering bribes, making promises, using his reputation as a former outlaw to gain their trust, their cooperation. Ginny, initially hesitant in this unfamiliar environment, found herself adapting, learning, growing stronger with each passing hour. She observed Rhett, the way he interacted with people, the way he navigated the complex social dynamics of the outlaw world. She saw a side of him she hadn't seen before, a shrewdness, a cunning, a resourcefulness that both impressed and slightly frightened her. She also realized that she had her own strengths to contribute. Her quiet determination, her empathy, her ability to connect with people on a personal level proved to be valuable assets. She befriended some of the women in the settlement, listening to their stories, gaining their confidence, gleaning scraps of information that might help them in their search. They worked together, a team, their skills complementing each other, their bond strengthening with each shared challenge. The line between outlaw and savior continued to blur as they used whatever means necessary to achieve their goal, to expose Blackwood, to secure their freedom. Their search led them to a series of dead ends, false leads, frustrating setbacks. Days turned into nights, the deadline looming closer, the pressure mounting. But they didn't give up. They persisted, driven by their shared purpose, their unwavering belief in each other, their growing love. One evening, as they sat around a small campfire, sharing a meager meal, Ginny looked at Rhett, his face illuminated by the flickering flames. She saw the weariness in his eyes, the lines of strain around his mouth, but she also saw the unwavering determination, the fire that still burned within him. "We'll find her, Rhett," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "I know we will." He met her gaze, his blue eyes softening. He reached out and took her hand, his touch sending a familiar warmth through her. "Thank you, Ginny," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For believing in me. For standing by me." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Rhett," she said, the words spoken without hesitation, without reservation. It was the first time she had said it aloud, the first time she had fully acknowledged the depth of her feelings for him. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a tenderness that took her breath away. "I love you too, Ginny," he said. "More than words can say." The moment was sacred, a declaration of love amidst the danger and uncertainty, a testament to the power of their bond, the resilience of their hearts. They had found each other again, after years of separation, after a lifetime of hardship. And they were determined to fight for their love, for their future, for the chance to build a life together, free from the shadows of the past. The next day, their persistence finally paid off. A woman, a former saloon girl who had known Maria, provided them with a crucial clue, a small, remote mission located in the foothills of the mountains, where Maria had reportedly sought refuge years ago. It was a long shot, a faint hope, but it was all they had. They set off immediately, riding hard, their hearts filled with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. The mission was located in a desolate, isolated area, a place where few people ventured. It was a place of peace, of prayer, of quiet contemplation, a place where secrets could be hidden, protected. As they approached the mission, they saw a figure standing in the doorway, a woman dressed in the simple habit of a nun. She was older, her face lined with wrinkles, her eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. But there was something familiar about her, something that made Ginny's heart skip a beat. Red dismounted and approached the woman cautiously. "Sister," he said, his voice respectful, "we're looking for someone." "A woman named Maria. She might have come here years ago." The woman looked at him, her eyes searching his. She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her response. Then she nodded slowly. "Maria is here," she said, her voice soft, gentle. "She is one of us now." "Sister Angelica." Ginny gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Maria, the witness, the key to their freedom, was a nun. It was unexpected, improbable, yet somehow fitting. The woman, Sister Angelica, led them inside the mission, to a small, sparsely furnished room. There, sitting by a window, reading a prayer book, was Maria. She looked up as they entered, her eyes widening in surprise. Rhett and Ginny explained their situation, their plight, their need for her testimony. Maria listened intently, her expression unreadable. The past, it seemed, had caught up with her, too. The love between Ginny and Rhett, tested by fire and circumstance, was about to face its ultimate trial. Chapter 17. Reckoning with the Past. Maria, now Sister Angelica, listened to their story with a mixture of apprehension and resignation. The years had etched their passage on her face, but her eyes still held the spark of the spirited young woman she had once been. The peace of the mission, the sanctuary she had found, was now threatened by the resurfacing of a past she had tried to bury. "I remember Samuel Blackwood," she said, her voice soft, yet firm. "He was a cruel, ruthless man. He destroyed many lives." She recounted the events of that fateful day, years ago, when she had witnessed Blackwood's crime. She had been working as a servant in the house of the family whose land Blackwood coveted. She had seen him argue with the landowner, had seen him draw his gun, had seen him shoot the man in cold blood. "I was terrified," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I ran. I hid. I knew he would come after me if he knew I had witnessed his crime." She had fled, seeking refuge, finding solace in the remote mission, dedicating her life to God, trying to forget the horrors she had witnessed. But the past, like a persistent shadow, had finally caught up with her. Ginny reached out and took Maria's hand, her touch gentle, reassuring. "We need your help, Maria," she said. "Your testimony can expose Blackwood, can bring him to justice. It can free us." Maria looked at Ginny, at Rhett, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a flicker of hope. She had lived in fear for so long, hiding from the world, seeking refuge in anonymity. But now, faced with the opportunity to right a wrong, to bring a criminal to justice, to help two people who had been wronged by him, she found a new strength, a new resolve. "I will testify," she said, her voice firm. "I will tell the truth. I will face my fears." Her decision, her courage, was a turning point. They had found their witness, their key to exposing Blackwood, their path to freedom. But the journey was far from over. They still had to get Maria to safety, to protect her from Blackwood's reach, to ensure that her testimony would be heard. Rhett, with his experience and his resourcefulness, took charge. He knew they couldn't return to Sarah's settlement, not yet. It was too risky. Blackwood would be expecting them there. "We need to go to Tucson," he said. "To the authorities. To a judge who can protect Maria. to a court where she can testify. It was a dangerous journey, a long ride across open desert, a constant threat of ambush, of capture. But they had no other choice. They left the mission under the cover of darkness, Maria riding with Ginny, Rhett leading the way. They rode hard, pushing their horses to their limits, stopping only for brief rests, always alert for any sign of pursuit. As they rode, Ginny and Maria talked, sharing their stories, finding common ground in their shared experiences of hardship, of loss, of resilience. Ginny learned about Maria's life before the mission, her struggles, her dreams, her hopes. Maria, in turn, learned about Ginny's life, her marriage, her escape, her love for Rhett. "He's a good man," Maria said, looking at Rhett riding ahead of them. "He has a good heart. He's changed." Ginny nodded, her heart filled with love and gratitude for Rhett. He had come a long way from the reckless outlaw he had once been. He had faced his demons, had reckoned with his past, had become a man of honor, a man of courage, a man worthy of her love. The journey was arduous, exhausting, fraught with tension. But they persevered, driven by their shared purpose, their unwavering determination to reach Tucson, to bring Blackwood to justice, to secure their freedom. As they neared Tucson, they saw a sight that made their hearts sink, a posse of riders, led by Samuel Blackwood himself, blocking their path. He had anticipated their move, had used his influence to intercept them, to prevent them from reaching the authorities. Rhett reined in his horse, his hand moving to his rifle. Ginny and Maria dismounted, seeking cover behind some rocks. A confrontation was inevitable. A showdown was about to begin. Blackwood rode forward, his face contorted with rage, his eyes filled with a cold, calculating hatred. "You can't escape me, Mercer," he snarled. "You and that woman. You'll both pay for what you've done." Rhett stepped forward, his stance firm, his eyes unwavering. "It's over, Blackwood," he said. "We have a witness. Maria. She saw everything. She'll testify against you." Blackwood laughed, a harsh, mocking sound.
"Anum?" he scoffed.
"Who will believe a nun? A woman who has hidden from the world for years? Her word against mine?" He raised his hand, signaling his men to prepare to attack. The reckoning with the past had reached its climax. The confrontation between good and evil, between justice and corruption, was about to erupt. The desert held its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash, the final showdown that would determine their fate, their future, their love. The odds were stacked against them, but they were not alone. They had each other, they had Maria, and they had the truth on their side. That, they hoped, would be enough. Chapter 18. Crossroads of Fate and Choice. The tension crackled in the air, thick and heavy, like the calm before a desert storm. Blackwood's men, a motley collection of hired guns and loyal ranch hands, fanned out, their rifles raised, their faces grim. Rhett stood his ground, his rifle at the ready, his body shielding Ginny and Maria, who crouched behind the rocks. "This doesn't have to end in violence, Blackwood," Rhett said, his voice calm, yet carrying a steely edge. "Let us pass. Let Maria testify. Let justice be served." Blackwood scoffed, his eyes filled with contempt. "Justice?" he sneered. "There is no justice but what I make. You're a fool, Mercer. You think you can defeat me? You think you can take what's mine?" "Ginny was never yours," Rhett retorted, his voice hardening. "She was a pawn in your twisted game, a victim of your greed. She was promised to me," Blackwood roared, his face turning red with fury. "By her husband. By a binding agreement." "An agreement made under duress," Rhett countered. "An agreement based on lies and deceit. It's worthless." "We have a witness who can prove it was valid," Blackwood responded. He gestured to a man. This man was a lawyer. "This won't hold in court. She was forced. We shall see." The standoff continued, the words exchanged like volleys of gunfire, the tension escalating with each passing moment. Ginny, watching from behind the rocks, felt a surge of fear, but also a fierce determination. She wouldn't let Blackwood win. She wouldn't let him destroy their lives, their love. Maria, her face pale but resolute, stepped forward. "I will testify," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing out across the desert. "I will tell the truth about what I saw. I will not be silenced." Her courage, her willingness to face her fears, was a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, his expression shifting from rage to a flicker of uncertainty. He hadn't expected Maria to be so strong, so defiant. Suddenly, a voice rang out from behind Blackwood's posse. "Hold your fire." A figure emerged from the group, riding forward on a horse. It was the sheriff from Tucson, the same sheriff who had given them 24 hours in Sarah's settlement. He was accompanied by several deputies, their rifles drawn, their faces grim. "What's the meaning of this, Blackwood?" the sheriff demanded, his voice authoritative. Blackwood, momentarily taken aback by the sheriff's unexpected arrival, regained his composure. "Sheriff," he said, his voice smooth, ingratiating. "These two are fugitives. They're wanted for questioning. I'm simply assisting you in their apprehension." "That's not how I see it," the sheriff said, his voice cold. "I see you obstructing justice. I see you threatening a witness. I see you breaking the law." He turned to Rhett. "Mercer," he said, "I understand you have evidence against Blackwood. Evidence of a crime committed years ago." Rhett nodded. "We do," he said. "And we have a witness who can corroborate it." He gestured towards Maria, who stepped forward, her head held high, her eyes filled with a quiet strength. The sheriff looked at Maria, his expression assessing. He could see the truth in her eyes, the courage, the determination. He knew he had a decision to make, a choice between upholding the law and succumbing to Blackwood's influence and power. He made his choice. "Samuel Blackwood," he said, his voice booming across the desert. "You're under arrest. For obstruction of justice, for witness tampering, and for questioning in connection with a murder committed years ago." Blackwood's face went white, then flushed with rage. "You can't do this," he roared.
I'm Samuel Blackwood.
"I have friends in high places. You'll regret this." The sheriff ignored him. He signaled his deputies, who moved forward, disarming Blackwood and his men, taking them into custody. The crossroads of fate and choice had been reached. The decision had been made. Justice, it seemed, would prevail. Ginny emerged from behind the rocks, her body trembling with relief, her eyes filled with tears. She ran to Rhett, embracing him tightly, her love for him overflowing. "We did it," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "We did it." Rhett held her close, his arms wrapping around her, his heart filled with gratitude and a profound sense of peace. They had faced the darkness, had overcome the obstacles, had fought for their freedom, for their love. And they had won. The desert, once a symbol of their struggles, their fears, their uncertainties, now seemed to stretch before them, vast and open, a landscape of possibility, of hope, of a future they could finally build together. The crossroads had led them to a new path, a path of justice, of healing, of love. And they would walk it together, hand in hand, their hearts filled with gratitude and a renewed faith in the power of the human spirit. The sheriff, a symbol of the law, had become an unlikely ally, a testament to the fact that even in the most corrupt of worlds, justice could still prevail. The choice had been made, and the consequences would ripple through their lives, shaping their future, cementing their bond, forever changing their destiny. Chapter 19. The Heart's Uncharted Territory. With Blackwood's arrest, a wave of relief washed over Ginny and Rhett, a sense of liberation that had been long denied. The immediate danger had passed, but the aftermath of the confrontation, the legal proceedings, the lingering shadows of the past, still loomed. The sheriff, true to his word, ensured Maria's safety, placing her under protective custody in Tucson. He also initiated a thorough investigation into Blackwood's past, gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, unraveling the web of deceit and corruption that the wealthy landowner had woven over the years. Ginny and Rhett remained in Tucson, assisting the sheriff, providing their own testimonies, supporting Maria through the ordeal. They stayed in a small, modest hotel, a temporary haven from the turmoil that had engulfed their lives. The days were filled with legal consultations, court appearances, and the constant media scrutiny that followed the arrest of a prominent figure like Samuel Blackwood. The story of the stolen bride, the outlaw's rescue, the nun's testimony had captured the public's imagination, turning Ginny and Rhett into reluctant celebrities. But amidst the chaos and the uncertainty, they found solace in each other's company. Their love, forged in the fires of adversity, had grown stronger, deeper, more resilient. They had faced death together, had fought for their freedom, had overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And through it all, their bond had remained unbroken, a testament to the power of their connection, the unwavering strength of their hearts. The nights in the hotel room were a sanctuary, a time for quiet intimacy, for whispered conversations, for shared dreams. They talked about their future, about the life they wanted to build together, about the possibilities that lay before them. Ginny, for the first time in years, felt a sense of hope, a sense of excitement about the future. She had shed the burdens of her past, the obligations, the regrets, the fears. She was free, truly free, to choose her own path, to live her own life, to love the man she had always loved. Rhett, too, felt a sense of liberation, a sense of redemption. He had faced his demons, had confronted his past, had emerged from the shadows a changed man. He had found love, had found a purpose, had found a home in Ginny's heart. One evening, as they sat on the small balcony of their hotel room, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, Rhett turned to Ginny, his eyes filled with a tenderness that took her breath away. "Ginny," he said, his voice soft, yet filled with a profound emotion, "will you marry me?"
For real this time.
No forced vows, no hidden agendas, no running away. Just us. And a future together. Tears welled up in Ginny's eyes, tears of joy, of gratitude, of overwhelming love. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "Yes, Rhett," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. With all my heart." He slipped a ring onto her finger, a simple band of silver, adorned with a single turquoise stone, the color of the Arizona sky. It wasn't an expensive ring, but it was perfect, a symbol of their love, their journey, their shared future. They embraced, their bodies melting together, their hearts beating as one. The heart's uncharted territory, once a landscape of fear and uncertainty, was now a map of hope, of promise, of a love that had been tested, tempered, and proven true. The future was still uncertain. The legal proceedings against Blackwood were ongoing. The details of their new life were yet to be determined. But one thing was certain, their love. It was a beacon, a guiding light, a force that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. They had found each other again, after years of separation, after a lifetime of hardship. And they were determined to make the most of their second chance, to build a life filled with love, with laughter, with peace. The desert, once a symbol of their struggles, was now a backdrop to their love story, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the enduring power of hope, the transformative magic of a love that had conquered all. The heart's uncharted territory had been explored, mapped, and claimed. And it was a beautiful, breathtaking landscape, filled with the promise of a forever together. They sealed their commitment with a kiss. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons. The trial of Samuel Blackwood was a media sensation, drawing reporters and spectators from across the territory. The courtroom was packed each day, the atmosphere thick with anticipation, the air buzzing with whispers and speculation. Ginny and Rhett, thrust into the spotlight, faced the scrutiny with a quiet dignity, their love for each other a shield against the public gaze. Maria, Sister Angelica, testified with a calm courage that belied her years of seclusion. She recounted Blackwood's crime with unwavering clarity, her voice ringing out through the courtroom, her words painting a vivid picture of the ruthless man he truly was. Her testimony was the cornerstone of the prosecution's case, the key to exposing Blackwood's past and bringing him to justice. Blackwood, represented by a team of high-powered lawyers, maintained his innocence, claiming that Maria's testimony was fabricated, that she was a delusional woman seeking revenge. He tried to portray himself as a victim, a successful businessman targeted by a jealous outlaw and a woman scorned. But his lies, his carefully constructed facade, crumbled under the weight of the evidence, the relentless questioning of the prosecutor, and the unwavering testimony of Maria and other witnesses who came forward, emboldened by her courage. Rhett, too, testified, recounting his own experiences with Blackwood, his knowledge of the man's ruthless nature, his confirmation of Maria's story. He spoke with a quiet authority, his past as an outlaw lending a strange credibility to his words. He was no longer running from the law, he was embracing it, using it to fight for justice, for the woman he loved. Ginny, although not a direct witness to Blackwood's original crime, provided crucial testimony about the forced marriage agreement, the duress she had endured, the threat he had posed to her and Rhett. She spoke with a quiet strength, her voice filled with emotion, her words resonating with the jury, with everyone in the courtroom. The trial lasted for weeks, a grueling ordeal that tested their resolve, their patience, their love. But they endured, supporting each other, drawing strength from their shared purpose, their unwavering belief in justice. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. The courtroom was filled to capacity, the silence deafening, the tension palpable. The jury, after days of deliberation, filed back into the courtroom, their faces somber, their expressions unreadable. The foreman stood up, his hands trembling slightly. "We, the jury," he said, his voice clear and strong, "find the defendant, Samuel Blackwood, guilty. Guilty on all counts." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by a wave of applause, of cheers, of relief. Blackwood's face went white, his eyes filled with disbelief, then rage. He had been defeated, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him. Ginny and Rhett embraced, tears streaming down their faces, their hearts overflowing with joy and gratitude. Justice had been served. Blackwood would pay for his crimes. They were free. The final confrontation of hearts and horizons had reached its conclusion. The hearts, once filled with fear, with uncertainty, with longing, were now filled with love, with peace, with hope. The horizons, once clouded by shadows of the past, were now clear, bright, stretching before them, inviting them to embrace a future they had fought so hard to secure. As they left the courtroom, hand in hand, they were greeted by a crowd of well-wishers, by reporters eager to capture their story, by friends who had supported them through their ordeal. They faced the cameras, the microphones, the questions, with a quiet dignity, their love for each other a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and unjust. The trial was over, but their journey was just beginning. They had a life to build, a future to create, a love to nurture. The desert, once a symbol of their struggles, was now their home, their sanctuary, a place where they could finally put down roots, where they could heal, where they could love. The final confrontation had been won, not with guns or violence, but with truth, with courage, with love. And that victory, that hard-won peace, was sweeter than anything they could have ever imagined. They returned to the hotel, exhausted and emotionally drained, ready to begin that future. Epilogue. The wedding took place in Sarah's settlement, under the vast, star-studded Arizona sky. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the residents of the Haven, by Maria, now returned to her quiet life at the mission, and by a few close friends who had made the journey from Harmony Creek, including Daniel, Ginny's brother, his face beaming with happiness for his sister. Ginny wore a simple dress of cream-colored linen, embroidered with wildflowers she had gathered herself. Rhett wore a clean shirt and a new pair of trousers, his rugged features softened by a smile that reached his eyes, a smile that spoke of a love that had endured, a love that had triumphed. There was no preacher, no formal vows. They stood before their friends, hand in hand, their hearts overflowing with love and gratitude. They spoke their own words, promises of forever, of a life shared, of a future built on trust, on respect, on an unwavering devotion to each other. "Ginny," Rhett said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are my life, my love, my everything. I will cherish you, protect you, honor you, for all the days of my life." "Rhett," Ginny said, her voice trembling slightly, "you are my home, my haven, my heart's desire. I will love you, support you, stand by you, forever and always." They exchanged rings, simple bands of silver, engraved with the date of their first meeting so many years ago, a reminder of the long, winding journey that had brought them to this moment. They kissed, a tender, passionate kiss that sealed their vows, that spoke of a love that had conquered all. The celebration that followed was filled with laughter, with music, with dancing under the stars. It was a celebration of love, of freedom, of new beginnings. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of hope, the enduring magic of a second chance. Ginny and Rhett built a life together on a small ranch near Sarah's settlement, a place where they could raise horses, cultivate the land, and live in peace. They worked hard, side by side, their love for each other a constant source of strength, of inspiration. They often visited Sarah, sharing meals, exchanging stories, offering their support to the community that had become their extended family. Maria, too, became a frequent visitor, her friendship with Ginny a bond forged in adversity, a testament to the power of forgiveness, of healing. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons, by the joys and sorrows of life, by the unwavering love that bound Ginny and Rhett together. They faced challenges, setbacks, but they faced them together, their bond unbreakable, their spirits undimmed. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their ranch house, watching the sunset paint the sky in a breathtaking display of color, Ginny leaned her head against Rhett's shoulder, her hand resting on his. "We made it, Rhett," she said softly, her voice filled with contentment. "We finally made it." He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his hand tightening around hers. "We did, Ginny," he said. "And it was worth every mile, every struggle, every tear." They sat in silence, watching the stars emerge, one by one, filling the vast expanse of the night sky. They had found their place in the world, their home in each other's arms. Their love story, a testament to the enduring power of the human heart, was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the harshest of landscapes, love could blossom, could endure, could conquer all. The desert, once a symbol of their trials, was now a testament to their triumph. And their love, a flame that had been kindled long ago, now burned brightly, illuminating their lives, warming their hearts, forever and always. They knew they had built their final horizon,